The Romantics didn't just write poems, they changed how we see the world. From the 19th century to our screens today, Romantic ideas have shaped art, politics, philosophy, and even how we value nature. Let's trace that long, winding afterglow. Romanticism left an expansive legacy. It redefined artistic priorities as feeling over rule, birthed new genres like Gothic and Proto-SF, fueled political and national identities, shaped modern notions of selfhood, inspired environmental thought, and transformed popular culture. Its influence is both direct, poets and novelists who acknowledged Romantic precursors, and diffuse, ways of feeling and representing the world. Literature inherited Romantic seeds in many ways. Victorian continuation and reaction. Victorian novelists and poets absorbed Romantic emotion but often married it to realism and moral concerns. Think of Tennyson's elegiac tones, Bronte's passion-driven domestic tragedies, and the Gothic lingering into the Victorian period as Stoker, Stevenson. Gothic legacy. Gothic tropes evolved into distinct genres. Frankenstein's fusion of romantic introspection and scientific anxiety helped spawn science fiction. The Gothic's emphasis on mystery and atmosphere influenced detective fiction's mood and modern horror's structures. Symbolism and the decadence. Late 19th century symbolists, for example in France, intensified Romantic attention to imagination and the inner life, favoring suggestive imagery over direct statement, a Romantic lineage in aesthetics. Modernism's dialogue with Romanticism. Modernist writers as T.S. Eliot, Pound, Woolf, both reacted against an inherited Romantic concern with consciousness and intensity, transforming it into new forms and fragmented subjectivity. Romanticism shaped intellectual life. Idealism and subjectivity. Romantics emphasized the primacy of inner experience. Their ideas intersect with German idealists, for example, Schelling, and helped popularize the modern idea of the inward, autonomous self. Early psychology and the emotions. The Romantic focus on intense feeling preceded later scientific interest in emotions and subjectivity. Existential and ethical questions. Romantics posed questions about authenticity, choice, and the costs of progress that would reappear in existential and humanist thought. Politics, nationalism and revolutionary influence. Romanticism and politics had a complex relationship. Revolutionary sympathy and dissent. Some Romantics like Shelley, Byron, supported political reform and national liberation movements. Their poetry became a language of protest and moral urgency. Romantic nationalism. In many places, Romanticism helped shape national myths by celebrating folklore, landscape, and language, feeding 19th-century nation-building in Germany, Italy, Poland, and beyond. Reactionary uses. Conversely, Romantic praise of tradition and the past could be used to justify conservative cultural projects as well. Romantic motifs could both challenge and shore up authority. The Romantics left striking impacts in visual art and music. Painting and visual art. Romantic painters like Turner, Constable, Goya, Caspar David Friedrich emphasized mood, light, and the sublime. Their landscapes visualized the emotional life of nature and human isolation. Music. Composers like Beethoven, Schumann, and Berlioz carried Romantic intensity into symphonies and lieder, longer forms, chromaticism, and program music that told poetic stories. Theater and opera. Romantic drama and opera accentuated heightened emotion and national themes, influencing stagecraft and libretto. Romanticism's relationship with science and technology is ambivalent. Critique of industrialization. Romantics lamented mechanization and urban squalor, advocating for nature, craft, and the imagination. Romantic science and natural philosophy. Some Romantics engaged with scientific ideas imaginatively, for example, the natural philosopher-poet. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein dramatizes the moral pitfalls of unchecked scientific ambition, a caution that echoes today in debates about technology and ethics. Romantic reverence for nature planted seeds for later environmental sensibilities. Nature as moral and spiritual teacher. Wordsworth and others framed nature as ethically formative. That idea influenced early conservation thinking and the later Romantic-inspired pastoral ideal. Proto-environmental critique. Romantic critique of industrial excess anticipated environmental movements that value biodiversity, landscape preservation, and critique of commodification. Gender, feminism and cultural change. Romanticism complicated gender roles. Women writers and female Gothic. Women like Mary Shelley, Anne Radcliffe, and others used romantic forms to interrogate women's legal and social position. This opened space for later feminist criticism. Romantic subjectivity and gendered experience. The emphasis on feeling gave new narrative space to interiority and emotion, tools later feminist writers would use to articulate oppression and agency. Popular culture, film and music. Romantic aesthetics continue in contemporary culture. Film and TV. Gothic and romantic themes pervade cinema, from Hammer horror to modern psychological thrillers and period dramas. Visuals that privilege mood, ruins, storms, and intense interiority come from romantic stock. Music and pop imagery. Romantic themes, melancholy, nature, rebellion, appear in singer-songwriters, ballads, and even album art. Fashion and design. Romanticism's fascination with historical dress, lace, and pastoral motifs recurs in fashion cycles and subcultures, for example, Gothic subculture. Canon, pedagogy and critique. The Romantic legacy also shaped what we teach and why. Canon formation. Romantic poets became central literary canon figures. Schools and universities canonized Wordsworth, Blake, Keats, Shelley, Byron, and Coleridge. Critical reassessment. 20th and 21st century critics expanded and complicated the canon, recovering women writers, colonial voices, and transnational romanticisms. Teaching uses. Romantic texts are used to teach poetic form, historical context, and critical thinking about emotion, ideology, and aesthetics. Romantic forms traveled and transformed across the globe. Colonial encounter. Romantic discourse shaped imperial representations of non-European peoples but also provided language for anti-colonial critique, Romantic revolutionary rhetoric adopted by independence movements. Transnational romanticisms. Local literary movements adapted Romantic forms to local landscapes and political projects. Romantic themes appear in European, Latin American, South Asian, and African literatures. Contemporary relevance and why it matters. Why do we still read the Romantics? Because they taught us to value feeling, to question progress for its own sake, and to see beauty as a force for meaning. In an era of climate anxiety, digital overload, and identity questions, Romanticism offers language and images that help us process wonder, loss, and longing. Classroom activities and further study. Use these class activities to bring the legacy alive. Comparative essay. Trace romantic motifs in a modern song, film, or novel. Creative project. Compose a short poem or song that responds to a romantic text. Debate. Does Romanticism still help or hinder political change today? Suggested further reading. Anthologies of Romantic Poetry, Studies of Romanticism and Nationalism, Essays on Romanticism and the Environment, and collections centering women and colonial perspectives. The Romantics handed us a toolkit, images, feelings, and questions that we still use to shape our world. Their legacy is not a museum piece, it's a living pulse in art, politics, and how we feel about being human. Keep listening to that pulse. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share,